Hello and welcome to M&A's Church Planting and Renewal Conversations. I'm Chris Vogel, Director of Next Gen Pastors, and I serve M&A as the Ecosystems Development Director. South Asian Americans are one of the fastest growing groups in the U.S., whose numbers have almost tripled in the past 25 years. It's now around, they estimate, about 5.5 million. In Canada, there are over 2 million who identify as South Asian or Asian Indian. With this growth, we have a tremendous opportunity before us. What may not be as well known is that here in the PCA, there's a growing number of planters and pastors reaching and serving this community. Well, I'm pleased to have with us today a great panel to talk about ministry among South Asians. Tony Thomas is the lead pastor of Joy of All Nations, a church plant in Northeast Atlanta that is planting out of Perimeter Church. Shiv Muthakumar is called as a church planter to Novi, Michigan, a suburb of Detroit. He's currently living in Seattle and raising support. Jagar Chinavin is a church planter in Herndon, Virginia, a community just west of District of Columbia. He's reaching out to the Hindus in that region. Shibu Oman worked as a prayer and evangelism pastor for 8 years. And since 2020, he works with Evangelism Explosion as their tri-state coordinator in Delaware, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey. He's presently as a member of Susquehanna Valley Presbytery and living in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Well, before we jump in, let me start off by saying that this is meant to be a conversation. We invite you to ask questions using the chat box or the Q&A feature that's there with Zoom. And if you're watching on Facebook, it's a little challenge for us to answer those questions. We'll try to do our best, but we'd like you to throw out the questions and be part of this conversation. Well, as we jump in, maybe Tony, if you could kind of help us, we're going to want to hear all of your stories, but get a little general background so we somewhat know what we're talking about. Would you kind of tell us, and I think you've got some graphics you can show us what we're talking about when we say South Asia.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Let me pull this up on our screen here. Okay, can you see that? Okay.
Yep.
All right, cool. Yeah, so we thought, obviously, again, we want to main time to be conversation, but we thought it'd be good to just orient us a little bit because not everyone knows what is South Asia, and it's a little bit of background before we get into that. So South Asians are represented by these countries. So main one people typically know is India, then Pakistan, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and the Maldives Islands. So that's what we typically mean by South Asia. In terms of what are the religions represented of South Asia, so you kind of put them in buckets. India and Nepal are largely Hindu countries. And then when you think of Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Maldives, those are largely Muslim countries, and then Bhutan and Sri Lanka are largely Buddhist countries. Okay, and you can kind of see the demographic breakdown there. I think it's helpful to know kind of what are the major religions of those countries. What about in the U.S.? So how many South Asians are in the U.S. compared to other ethnic groups? So, in the recent census, Asian Americans in general, about 6%, and then South Asians make up about 1.5% of our U.S. population, about 5.4 million people. So it's kind of a big picture. In terms of where are South Asians in the U.S., these are the major metropolitan cities. So you can see New York has, and then kind of metropolitan areas. So we include New Jersey is the largest, Chicago, San Francisco, Dallas, and so on and so forth. And so you can kind of see where are they largely populated. And then what about religions of Indians? And it's just a little bit easier to do Indian religions first for demographic sake. But what's interesting is in India, the breakdown of religions is, again, largely Hindu. But as you look at Indian American people that have immigrated here, there is a significant portion, especially you'll notice, of Christians that have increased. Part of it's the immigration patterns. Part of it is, potentially people, also coming to faith. There's people that are more open here, which kind of gets maybe into our conversation as well. But you can see some of the differences there. So just want to give a few of those demographics. that hopefully kind of centers us and gives us a picture of what we're talking about.
That's great. That's very helpful. And it's interesting, as you mentioned, we can talk about this in a minute, but just are they coming over as Christians or becoming Christians here? Probably both, but that's great. All right. Well, let's hear from each of you. What's a little bit more about yourself, where you're from, where your family's from, what part of South Asia, or India, you're in your own personal faith background and history. So, yep. Shibu, if you start us off.
Great. Thank you, Chris, for this opportunity. I'm from, I was born and brought up in Kerala. That's the south part of India. That's the place we always understand, and we tell people that AD 52, Thomas, one of the disciples of Jesus Christ, he reached out Kerala with the gospel. So we are known as St. Thomas Christians. I grew up in a Eastern Reformed church called Marthoma Church. But I grew up as a nominal Christian, but I became a committed Christian through an underground church in Saudi Arabia. And in 1994, a Hindu converted Christian who shared the gospel to me. So I don't want to give a whole story, but that's my basically my commitment to Christianity. Okay.
Oh, that's great. Great. Yeah, Jagar, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I was born and raised in Singapore. I was born in a Hindu family and didn't know anything about Christianity. And I was without hope, and I was scared of death. And that's where I started to ask questions about religion. I just want to cut the story short. So I was converted in Singapore. I'm a Hindu convert. So I love Jesus, and I wanted my fellow Indians to know Christ, especially from the Hindu background. So anyway, my family and I left Singapore to US because I wanted to receive theological education in the US. And then, again, I want to cut the story short. The elders in our church asked me, so what is your next step? Where are you? How can we help you? Would you like to serve among the Indians in South Carolina? And then that's where, okay, let me think about it. And then I started to do research like what Tony did, I think about 8 years ago. I found that in California, there are about 500,000 Indians. And then in other parts, there were like 200, 100,000 and so on. But what struck me was this, that Fairfax County in Virginia, there were about 40,000 Indians. So I thought this place would be a good place to do ministry. So from South Carolina, my family and I moved to Fairfax County in Virginia. So right now we are in Herndon, Virginia. It's like a little Indian town. We call it Little India. So that's where we are right now.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Thank you. Yeah. Shiv.
Hi, my name is Shiv Muthukumar. I was born in a Hindu family in India. I was born actually in Chennai in the south. So my parents speak Tamil, but I was raised in the north in New Delhi, where all my friends spoke Hindi. So I grew up speaking Hindi, and I came to the United States about 15 years ago to pursue graduate education in the field of computer science. And that's where I ran into Christian students on campus. And some of them, they took me to a PCA church. And during my time at the university, I came to know Christ. Then I moved to Seattle to work as a software engineer and just began feeling a strong sense of call to ministry. Went to seminary and was ordained in the PCA. By the time I finished seminary, I came to a reformed understanding of the Bible. And my heart, I'm married to Namhee. She's from Korea. So we are kind of a culturally mixed family. And obviously our children growing up in America with, American culture, my heart's desire and calling, I felt, is to plant a church which is able to reach South Asians and Asians and also Americans and have a blended culture in the church where we understand one another and follow Christ within our cultural settings.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you. And Tony, tell us about yourself, your story.
Yeah. So Tony Thomas, I was born in Chicago. So my parents actually are from Kerala, so same place that Shibu's family is from as well too. So grew up again in kind of that St. Thomas Indian Christian heritage. So our Christian faith goes as far back as we can trace in terms of our genealogy. So there's, a lot of blessing that we experienced from that. But I grew up in what's called the CSI Church, the Church of South India. Maybe the closest parallel would be like the Anglican Church, so something like that. So I learned some Bible foundations, but I think I had a hard time really grasping, understanding the gospel. So I really only came to real faith in Christ, I'd say, towards the end of high school. When I came to faith, I felt a call to ministry towards college and actually served in a church called Covenant Fellowship Church, which was actually a large, Korean American. So it was a large Asian American community. And also we served with an Indian ministry called Indian Christian Fellowship there. So spent 12 years there in Champaign, Illinois. And it's where I was ordained in the PCA as well too. And then eventually connected with Perimeter. I've been in Atlanta for 3 years. And my wife and I have always had a unique heart for our own people group, for other Indians, and particularly to see Hindus and Muslims reach with the gospel. And yet also through our experience at our other church, we had a heart for the nations as well too. Just, got to pastor with international students and various other ethnicities. So yeah, now we're planting Joy of All Nations, Northeast Atlanta. Kind of the area that we're planting is one of the fastest growing South Asian populations in the whole country. So one statistic I say is one elementary school nearby us is about 75% of the kids are Indian at that one school. So it's pretty incredible, the growth here, and majority of them don't know Christ. And so our desire is to plant a church that can reach them, but also the diversity of the nations that are around us. So yeah.
Great. Well, thank you. Thanks a lot. So again, it's fascinating, some different ways in which you've come in, here to the States, you've come into the PCA, different parts of the country. So which is really wonderful. What, from your perspective, what are you seeing, and from the research you've done, what are bringing South Asians here to the US? What's the draw? What are they looking for? Tell us a little bit about that.
Probably the top two things that I can think of is higher education,
Okay.
graduate level education, especially master's or PhD level education. And secondly, I think jobs, professional jobs in the field of technology, healthcare, other professional pursuits. Yeah.
Okay. So the education is going to be an important component in that and a professional kind of track looking for. Okay, good. Any other thoughts or insights?
I think one thing that's helpful to realize is that there's different waves of immigration that have come into the US too. There's kind of probably the first initial large wave was probably the 70s. So my parents' generation, for example, they came in the 70s. That's why I was born here. And then and that was kind of a wave of I think students, but also that could be why there was a lot of Indian Christians in the statistics you saw. That initial wave, a lot of them were people from Kerala, I think, actually, and that's why Indian Christian churches were established. And then the 90s was another kind of tech boom, and I think the 2000s, 2010 is actually when the most number of Indians I think have actually come into the country, and that's the third wave, which has been kind of what Shiv said. I think tech, the IT sector has brought in a ton of new Indians into the country. So
yeah, I came here as a H-1B visa. Then I pursued my ordination in PCA. Then I got ordained, and then I transferred into religious visa. So that was my transition.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good.
I'm also seeing in a number of cases when young families settle here in the US and they start having children, they often have their parents come, not just to visit, but sometimes they also migrate and come and live.
Okay. Yeah, so have what sometimes might be perceived, not reverse, but so the younger generation with kids and then the older generation joins them rather than starting like Tony, your parents came and then after that. So it's going to have a variety to it. Yeah, well, that's helpful. Well, how would you describe the present state of the South Asian presence in churches? So you've shown how there's a higher percentage here in the States than there would be in, let's just say, India. And we said some of it's going to be coming over as believers, some of it's going to be coming to faith here. What has been your experience? What have you seen? What stands out?
Okay, let me interject for a while.
Yeah.
During the fundraising time, I had the opportunity to visit many churches. In those churches, I hardly found Indian Christians. Even if you see, it could be just like one or two or maybe zero. So that's what I'm seeing, especially in the PCA churches. I'm not sure about OPC or any other churches. But what I also notice is this, like what Tony said, in those days, the Indian Christians also migrated into the US. They form pockets of non-denominational churches.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Telugu-speaking people will stick together and they have their own church. And then, forgive me, even the Malayali churches will have their own church. So they would have the indigenous churches. And even the Tamil-speaking people, they have their own churches. So even right now, that's what I'm seeing, So recently, I just want to share a story. I was invited by a Telugu church, and it was I think anniversary celebration. So I went to the church with my wife, and all the singing and the preaching was in Telugu, but they invited us. So I felt a bit out of place, but I rejoiced that, these are all my Christian brothers, although they're Telugu speaking. But they had a little bit of English songs because of the second generation children.
Mm-hmm.
So this is just one story that I would like to share with you.
And I think that's, let me just pick up on that a second. I think that's really helpful for a lot of our listeners to hear and understand that if you have some familiar with India, how many would, again, just roughly speaking, languages, distinct cultures make up that nation?
Maybe 30 languages with 1,000 dialects. Yes, and also I just wanted to add, as Jagar said, and even Indians, especially from South India, people are coming, migrating to the United States with their churches. That's why when they come, they have a diaspora church here. They can part of that. Even the churches are working. Even most of the pastors or ministers, they are coming from Kerala to be here for a 3 years of period as their religious leader, and then they go back. So likewise, a same language speaking church be here with them in their growing immigrant culture,
Mm-hmm.
So so and also that maybe for the second and third generation, they have maybe a English speaking small group, part of that church. They have a praise and worship kind of a group there. Yeah. So.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's great.
Yeah, just like as Jagar and Shibu shared, there are a number of language groups and cultures within India. And so when Christians come from India, they naturally join ethnic churches, which are within their language. But if there are people who come from India and become Christians here, it's usually through maybe a campus ministry or some outreach ministry of a large church, sometimes even a mega church. So they are not really rooted in a tradition or a denomination. I usually have found them in large non-denominational churches. Sometimes when they, say, okay, this is a particular denomination we want to identify with, then they'll make an intentional decision. But otherwise, if they're not in an ethnic language-specific church, which is usually the case when they're second generation, third generation Christians or more. So they're found in the larger evangelical world. I think sometimes lost as to why do we have so much denominational diversity? What does it mean? Where do I fit?
So yeah, Shiv is correct. During my ministry, I've seen Indian Christians coming from different, like CSI. And then when they come to our church, they're asking the question, why, so many denominations? And people prefer non-denominational. Not only people coming from CSI, there are other Christians who came by. They prefer not to have church government or institutionalized kind of a church. And also, some Indian Christians do not want the liturgy in a such way that we have confession of sin. There was one person who stepped into our church, and when the church service was over, and he said, Pastor, if you have the confession of sin, no Indian Christians would come. And I was shocked. But it is a learning thing for me. I want to learn about how other Indian Christians feel and how we can approach them and minister to them.
What have you found to be the reason for that? I mean, I can understand in certain majority churches, I've had people say, don't do that. It's embarrassing to have people say they're sinners. I'm going, okay. But is there something cultural that you have found that can help you figure out how do you bridge that in your context?
The diaspora churches, actually, they follow a liturgy. But, all these liturgies are in their own language. It's actually really rich in theology. Basically, most of the, liturgy is formed, with the Bible. They just formed. Actually, the Bible is actually root. They have taken from Psalms and different Psalms and just put it together as a liturgy. And during the church service, they just recite that, So, okay. Yeah, that's the way, actually. Tony, do you want to attach anything to that?
Yeah, I was going to say that I could speak for someone that grew up in the Indian church in second generation. I feel like there's a lot of people like myself that are in a few different places. Either they've left the church completely and they've fallen away from faith because, we grew up in liturgical churches, which is not bad, but I don't think the gospel is clearly articulated in those settings. I think people walked with kind of the church is a very traditional, formal place that has no meaning to my life. Then there's people that really did come to faith and they mostly ended up in kind of like non-denominational, larger mega church type churches, because those are the ones they knew to go to, right? They didn't know where else to go besides the large mega church that's there. And I think people there, they get fed, discipled, hopefully sometimes, but sometimes they just kind of are just, maintaining their Christian life. I think because most PCA churches are smaller, I think that's partly why, you tend to not find as many Indians that come across PCA churches, because if they started in the Indian Christian church, they're just floating from there to the largest church they can find where they can find, a place to be spiritually fed. So, yeah, that would be my observation, I think, of the general landscape. But again, this is just speaking of Indian Christian as a subset, which is a small subset amongst Indians, and then South Asians is just tons of others that are not Christian at all, and grew up as Hindus or Muslims or Sikhs, and that's its own different ballgame, which maybe Shiv and Jigar, you guys can give definitely a lot of insight into what that mindset or community would be like.
Yeah, what does it look like reaching, Sikh or Hindu background? And Jagar, that's who you're looking to reach in Herndon, right?
Yeah, so we are trying to reach out to the large population of Indians here. But I was sharing with Shiva that that should not be the strategy, because that strategy may not work if we are just primarily trying to reach out to the Indians, because it is a long road. You will not see the fruits right now. So the best way to do church plant, this is my opinion, to have a broader perspective, like Tony Thomas, reaching out to all ethnic groups, communities, but not losing the focus, knowing that there is a large concentration of Indians in this region, that we should reach them. Otherwise, nobody is going to reach them out. But then we need our fellow Christians to team up together, because they might be living in that neighborhood, and then they can minister, rather than church planter himself trying to reach out the Indians is super hard from my experience. So that's why I like Tony Thomas' approach towards church plant work.
Can I add something to that? And throughout my friendship evangelism, I'm doing different types of evangelism, 101 and hospitality evangelism, friendship evangelism, street evangelism. So through our friendship evangelism, 5 years back, I reached out a Sikh family. And then today, four of that family members, they are Christians. And I was able to baptize one person in the month of February this year.
Wow.
But the problem, what I'm facing now, they speak, they are more, actually, the older generation, they speak more Punjabi or Hindi, but I'm not able to find maybe a reformed good church to attach them. And if I take them to, my old PCA church, they are not able to understand everything well. That's kind of a problem. But one of their granddaughter, she's maybe 21-year-old, but she recently professed faith in Jesus, but she is reading Bible and all. But she's not, publicly connected with any other churches yet. So there is a problem. Okay, they speak only their own language. In that place, where is our space for these kind of, new Christians, nurturing in them their daily Christian walk through, giving them a fellowship of the body of Christ, So it is really, really difficult. I speak, Hindi, but, I'm actually 60 miles away from their home. I'm not able to maybe reach them for a kind of a physical fellowship, only through phone. I can reach out to them maybe once in a while. So there is a problem, there is a good, if we can find a group of people in, growing in their language speaking worship group, but second or third generation English speaking, so we can reach out and find a pattern for that kind of community on the road. That would be great. I know, there are, many things need to be attached, into the stream on the road. Yeah.
I think a number of South Asians who come to America have an open mind towards, at least, if not embracing, but understanding the culture. And actually, they also have desire to meet Americans and internationals and befriend them. I think there is a place for ethnic churches where they can express their faith in their own heart language. But there is also this wide middle ground of churches that are blended in culture. Like Shibu was saying, if a Punjabi family has come to know Christ, This is the kind of challenge I also imagine myself. If they come to know Christ or they want to know Christ, what kind of church will I take them to? If it's a completely unadapted American Western cultural church, there's a lot of things that they cannot understand. There are lots of barriers sometimes. And the path to discipleship becomes hard, and sometimes they completely, lose interest and break away.
Yeah.
So that's kind of compelled me to consider church planting, and I'm called to plant in the Detroit area, in Novi, which has a lot of South Asian population. The vision is to experiment culturally and develop a blended culture. All churches have a culture. How can we incorporate, like for instance, Jager was speaking about the confession of sin. I think maybe one of the reasons for the embarrassment around that is the shame and honor dynamics of the South Asian culture. How do we deal with that? Scripture speaks a lot about shame and honor, but we sometimes completely miss that coming from a Western cultural standpoint.
Yeah. Maybe pick up that what you had said at the beginning there too, that is interesting about what are the barriers that you're seeing for someone from a South Asian, of the variety of South Asian cultures coming into a dominant culture, majority culture context, because we don't see it. And so what should we be at least aware of in that context?
I think it's more of an opportunity, but it's probably could be stated as a barrier. If you were to ask me, and I was speaking with Jager yesterday, and we both agreed that I think the number one felt challenge for South Asians in America is loneliness. Because typically they are professionals, so they are well off, but they feel very lonely and empty inside. And they've even become successful, but it has left them emptier than before.
Okay.
So if you want to reach people like that, and they're coming from a very communal culture, it's a drop-in culture. These days, we don't even drop in phone calls. We text, can I call you? So pathways of reaching them has to do with friendship, with hospitality, spending time with them, actually able to do life with them. But sometimes in the American fast-paced urban life, a lot of these people in urban, suburban settings, life is fast-paced. We have 45 minutes to have coffee with each other at a third, in a coffee place. That's kind of challenging to build a deep friendship. And the more we try to build deep friendships and dropping our agendas, I just want to get to know you. I want to reveal myself, and I want to know who you are. I think that's my understanding of reaching South Asians. Other brothers can chime in.
No, that helps. Any other thoughts?
Hop on a couple thoughts, hopping onto what Shiv said as well too. So one is, obviously part of our approach is to be multi-ethnic as a church. I've been using the language of minority-led multi-ethnic. And part of it is because I do think that there is a place for the ethnic church, especially if language is a barrier. But I think a lot of the Indians, especially that are coming recently, they do speak English. English, being able to go to a church service is not a barrier for English. And so, in that sense, we can have an English speaking service. But also part of our approach of being multi-ethnic is by being a minority that's leading, it represents to them that, okay, you can be Indian and Christian at the same time, which is one major barrier for people to think that, okay, to be Christian means I have to sell my Indian identity. So that one, leading as an Indian Christian and as a pastor, communicates that's not true. But also we have in our community right now in our core group, we have East Asians, we have Caucasians. I think part of the idea there is that, we may create familiarity, but sometimes their shame, kind of like Shiv said, sometimes their most shameful things, they would rather share with someone that's an outsider to their culture than an insider. So they would maybe go to our Caucasian member and share the brokenness they feel in their home, marriage, than they would maybe even with me,
Right.
because I'm an insider to their culture versus there's an outsider of the culture. And I think there's a beautiful thing that can happen through a multi-ethnic church that can minister to the heart of an Indian or South Asian in a unique way, creating commonality and creating safety in the same community. So,
I think that's a great point. It then requires that relational element and the time spent to be able to let someone know I'm here and I'm available.
Right. Yeah. So actually another part of our strategy is using home groups. So obviously we believe in the value of Sunday corporate worship, but our groups, our small groups, whatever you want to call them, we want them to meet in homes, and so that hospitality is a big part of how we do church life. So,
any other thoughts? We're getting some questions, and might take some of those. Some have picked up, and I'm going to move back and forth on some of these questions. But again, this one is more related to what we were talking about earlier. Michael says, I appreciate the observation about confession of sin. What are some of the big barriers, like shame, honor dynamic, to welcoming and or accommodating South Asians into worship? Anything else they're wondering that might be?
So I might show a little diagram. It's really an iceberg. You can just see the top of the iceberg, which has food, music, language, visual arts, and clothing, and so on. But below the iceberg is things such as values, body language, attitudes towards age and authority. Notions of modesty, I think that's a very big thing. What is modest and what is immodest? Approaches to problem solving, assumptions, concepts of fairness. So this is from a book called Multi-Asian.Church by DJ Chuang. He's, I think, Chinese American. But I found this diagram very helpful. There's a lot under the surface, which takes a little time to understand, but it's not that hard, because I think if we truly try to befriend a South Asian and enter their world, they will reveal themselves, and you will see that how they view a number of things is very, very different, their aspirations in life. There's a very interesting joke, or actually a real incident that was relayed by a pastor. Two kids come back home. One is an Asian kid and one is an American kid. They come back home, and the American kid was asked by the parent, did you have fun in school today? Whereas the Asian kid's parent asked, did you learn something in school today?
Yeah, that's I can hear that. Yeah. Other thoughts?
I see a question here from Tom George. He asks, can everyone share their journey to the PCA? Going to a PCA church is not intuitive to Indians, Christian or other religion. Yeah, I can briefly say this. Indians and South Asians who are migrating to the United States, often being educated, and they are thinkers, they have higher degrees. I think one of the strengths of the PCA is we have a very strong theology and doctrine. It's our strength. And that is actually very helpful in reaching South Asians, especially when they become interested and they begin asking questions. There's a lot of wealth in terms of sharing doctrine and theology and teaching the Bible. I also think the high view of worship and the liturgical approach to worship is also something appealing to educated and spiritually minded South Asians. So I think that's another strength of the PCA. But if the PCA can also, if there are more PCA churches that can allow some cultural blending and understanding and incorporating some cultural practices and values. And I think it could be something as simple as we're going to have Friday night fellowship. That's Friday night, you finish your work. We want to just hang out and spend time with each other. Because that's what South Asians like. We like to spend time with each other. Can a church have Friday night fellowship without compromising the gospel? Absolutely.
That's good. That helps. Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a couple, thoughts for also the PCA. Another thing going is just our covenant theology, and just the idea that the members of the church are believers and their children too. And I think that because family orientation is such a big part of Indian, South Asian culture, I think that can fit in theologically, that fits in with a strong cultural aspect of our culture as well. And actually, interestingly, I think a lot of the people that grew up in Indian Christian churches grew up with the covenant worship style too, which most of us probably resented growing up, because, for myself, I grew up with services that were in Malayalam and I didn't understand what was going on half the time. But there is something to that I think is redeemable, can be redeemed. That could be an element that is attractive to the PCA. But yeah, I think, but practically speaking, I would say some churches you can create a South Asian space, like a fellowship group, just for them to connect with each other. And then, I remember even being at Perimeter, like it'd just be an interesting thing after service. Most people would leave, they have somewhere to go, but the Indians and the East Asians would tend to hang out after service. We'd just be in the foyer hanging out for like 30 minutes or an hour. We have the gift of loitering, I think, where we just can't stop talking to each other. So, just again, in creating those spaces, realizing that going to church is not just about the worship service, it's about the people. It's connecting with each other. That's part of the worship. And I think that that's really important for South Asians, I think.
Yeah, no, that's great. That helps.
I think if you want to really reach out, our Indian neighbors, basically at first we need to love them. Love means, sometimes even in today's culture, most of the people, they know that if a Caucasian American is, started to a conversation with a Hindu neighbor, he always think in his mind that some point he is going to share his faith with me. That kind of they have that. But then, if you really love them, you need to show them. Maybe if you see their a trash can, in their driveway, when you go and pick yours, why don't you pick there too? You're just starting a reach out to that brother. And also we need to consider, the family as a one unit, So, the same problem actually I faced, with other Hindu Punjabi family. The husband is not actually in the faith, but, the wife and the daughter, and they all came to faith. We always consider family as a one unit. If we can reach out, we need to reach out the whole family, So because as Tony mentioned, it's detachable, kind of a covenantal. I mean, we call it covenant relationship in our theological word, but then family is a great strong unit in Indian culture. So that's why it's very important to when we think to reach out a Hindu neighbor. You think about the husband, wife, and children together as one unit.
That's the one thing I see in our community. I just earlier quickly highlighted just our neighborhood, bordered by the streets. 4,000 people live in this one area in this town that I lived outside of Milwaukee. And of the 4,000, 11% or almost 12% were Asian, large category. Only 1% African American and about 1% indigenous American. But of that 11 or 12% Asian, 85% was South Asian. In this, and just in my neighborhood. And what I notice is before COVID, where everybody went out for walks just to get out of the house, the families were always out walking, and it was always multi-generational. It was three mom and dad with a stroller, and then the parents, grandparents were out and always together. which you don't see in a majority culture context. That's great. A question here from Chris Six. He said, we have about a half dozen Pakistanis in our church and only one person from India. When Indians visit, I'm inclined to introduce them to the Pakistani members. I know little about the history between those nations. Any guidance for me in our church setting, especially if the Indians are not believers? Anything that for those of us that be aware of, or
yeah, I might say yes, there is political tension between the two nations, but when I meet a Pakistani, there is no we don't see each other as enemies or anything like that. But it's typical that if you're North Indian, because Pakistan's, they speak Urdu and Hindi there. If you're a North Indian, you're able to connect with them more easily because of the language. And obviously, if you're from a Muslim background, you connect with them better. I think that is, it's fine to connect them together. They may or may not connect with each other, but it should not be a problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So not interpreting the national issues with the personal issues.
I have never seen that be a problem. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I just want to add to what she said. Even in our church, we have one Pakistani, and also we have North Indians. And North Indians, they can understand. I mean, they speak Hindi, and the Pakistani can understand Hindi because Urdu and Hindi is quite close. So I see the beauty when they, get together, they start talking, and they put aside all the national controversies and disagreement.
Yeah, but if you're trying to reach Muslims, whether from India or Pakistan, Muslim ministry takes on its own emphases, which is quite different from reaching South Asian Hindus or Buddhists. It's a completely different ballgame because Muslims know exactly what they believe and they will kind of challenge the Bible. But the Hindus, they are very fuzzy about what they believe. They have usually not a very good idea what the Bible teaches. Even though they may not be open to it, but the approaches of discipling and evangelizing them are quite different.
Oh, great. David here, who I believe is RUF International, and he said he has seen a major influx of Indian students post-COVID, and that now Indians are the majority group on many of our campuses. How would you encourage and challenge us as campus ministers interacting with those students, and also as those who are equipping PCA churches to engage these students?
Like somebody said, in the back of the mind of the Indians, they always think, oh, these faith people are going to convert me. That's what they always think. Even I'm going to visit India in January. I'm planning to go to my village, and my niece, who is a Hindu, told my wife that, knowing that I'm a pastor, when you all come to India, please don't preach your Christianity to us. Leave your Christianity in US and come and visit us. So even at REF students, we minister to the George Mason students, Indian students, grad students. So we invite them to our house, and they would have meals in our house because we wanted them to feel at home. They are far from India, from their home country. So for the meals, they would come. And then we take the opportunity during the meals to share the gospel. But after hearing the gospel, do they, decide to come to the church? No, I haven't seen. And no, there was one guy who came, but still until now, he's not converted. So again, I would say it's a slow process. I don't think so I can expect fruits in a short while. But given the opportunity that we have many Indian students at the campus, I think we should invite them to our houses and give them meals and share the gospel.
I'll share a couple thoughts because we were on campus, for several years, and part of our ministry was with international students. So a couple thoughts. One, we had an Indian Christian ministry, and we actually created a second group we called it Indian Faith Journey. So even during, we called it Quad Day, where you do student organization signups. We wrestled with how secretive should we be? Should we be just kind of a international friendship group? And I think there's validity to all sorts of approaches. But one of our thoughts was what if we're just a little bit more forward in the sense of hey, is there anyone that wants to investigate faith and study the Bible? And we were surprised how many people actually signed up. And I think what that meant is that in some ways there's low-hanging fruit of people that their hearts are already open. And it's just a matter of putting the opportunity out there. And we found that they were, they signed up to study the Bible and to engage with us. And so I think we found that approach to be helpful. The other is honestly, I think a mixed international group is really effective. I found that, because, Indians are interacting with their Chinese, their Korean classmates, that becomes their community. And so if there's a Christian fellowship that has international community, I think that actually is quite comfortable community for Indians, even if they're, from different religions too. So I think those would be two suggestions.
Yeah, I'd echo what Tony's saying. I was the fruit of an international student ministry, and my call to ministry was formulated in an international student setting where there were Christian students from different backgrounds, different countries, actually. And I have seen, speaking of loneliness as a problem, that's still the problem. But when young people are coming from South Asia to America, they come with their eyes open. They want to learn. They're curious. They're finally free from the shackles of Indian culture, so to speak. They are curious. They want to learn. And I have seen and I experienced myself much more openness to things spiritual, cultural. So I tell this brother who's working with RUF that keep inviting them. Keep loving them. Like Shibu said, love transcends all languages, all cultures. If you truly love them, feed them well, hang out with them, ask questions, get to know them is very powerful. And there is not much of a PC in, politically correct, don't talk about religion and politics kind of thing. Those are the only two things we talk about often.
Yeah, you see, the genuinity is really very, very relevant. They should feel that this fellow is genuine in my relationship. So I used to meet a person during our street evangelism. So he was from northern Sudan. He followed Islam, and when I offered a gospel tract, he said, "I'm a Muslim," and then I said, "Hey." I gave him a gospel tract in Arabic. He received it. Then from that point onwards, we started a relationship. So then every week he passed by, he stopped and asked questions. And then later I started to invite him for coffee. And we go to different coffee shops and had coffee. And we had that relationship almost 9 months. During that time, I gave him Arabic Bible. I also speak Arabic. So that helped him in many other ways. But 9 months, he did not profess his faith in Jesus Christ. But during that time, he asked 100 questions to me. Why Christians sing songs during their worship service. So what we are doing, we are actually sowing seeds in their life. So one day, it is Bible says someone is sowing the seed, someone is watering, and someone is going to reap it.
Right.
So we are always sowing. And God in his due time, he will send his spirit to some other places to reap. That's really, I have many stories, but in this short time, we don't have much.
No, this is and again, this type of thing, I hope this is the beginning of conversations, not obviously the conclusion. And thinking about it as the beginning, we've got about 5 minutes left, so I want to throw out a question to you. I think you'd mentioned there's probably maybe 10 teaching elders in the PCA who would be, considered South Asian. So let's dream. Tell me, what are you praying for in 10, 20 years in the context of your ministry, the PCA, that we could, pray for and be excited to see if the Lord so moves? What are your dreams?
Just
Go ahead.
going off of the statistic that Tony showed, number of urban centers in the United States have hundreds of thousands of South Asians. If we can have one PCA church per 50,000 South Asians in an urban center, which is able to successfully enfold South Asian Christians and minister to them, reach out to them, I think that would be a great start.
Yeah. Yeah. So what do we see? New York has almost 800,000 in that total metro area.
Yeah, that's
That
16
would be
churches you need right there.
that would be exciting.
Yeah.
Well,
good.
what I see, there are many, the field is ripened. You see, the many are coming to our backyard, our neighbors, Hindi speaking, different language speaking. One thing recently I noticed, we have many MDW missionaries who served in India. They retired and came back to United States. Even my church, we have two of them, and they speak Hindi and they can really, connect with these kind of people. So why don't we maybe start using the resources, retired missionaries who worked in India and came back to United States, and they're in good health and they still have, time to minister to these kind of communities. Maybe invite them, give them a public call. Hey, the field is ripened. We are only 10 people. Why don't you join with Jager, and why don't you join with the Shivan and Tony and Shibu, wherever even they are able to. That's a good way we can actually invite more people for the harvest.
No, and I don't know if it's still the case. I know MDW, a number of the missionaries that were in India lost their visas in the last couple of years. And there's opportunities. That is great. Good. Any other
I would
thoughts?
say, a scripture that's always been impactful for me is the harvest is plentiful, yet the workers are few. I pray, Lord, a harvest to send out workers. So as deeply desire to see the unreached people reached. But as we look at the wisdom Jesus gives us, he says to pray for workers. And so I'm really praying that he'd raise up more teaching others. I think for PCA ministers, people that are on this call, or just to have an eye out for young Indian South Asians that you could invest into and mentor, raise up to be leaders, whether they become pastors or not. But yeah, particularly, if the Lord would raise up more pastors, I would love that. I think all of us on here would love to see more of that. I think one of the questions on here Sanal has about, could there be a South Asian American ministry? I think that would be great. I think that could be a good next step of, gathering even the brothers here, we all connected within the last year and met at GA, and so we're slowly trying to build some momentum and encouragement for each other, and hopefully encourage others that look like us to say, like, hey, you can be involved in this work too and be part of building the kingdom, particularly to impact South Asians. So that would be my dream, just to see more workers.
And Tom mentions about just getting a listserv going. Starting connections, and again, that's where things can take off. Nothing rarely ever starts big. It starts with small, and it spreads out. So I mean, take that even from the context of the church in India. One apostle, Thomas, going, and look where we are now.
And also, Chris, I like to see many PCA churches to have the awareness that there are many Indians around their church in their city, that they would include intentional desire to reach out to the Indians there, and also to think about how they can penetrate into that community. I think that is the hardest part. How can we penetrate into the Indian community? And to do that, we need to know someone in that community, an Indian, and that's the hardest part.
Yeah. Just to piggyback on that, I'll add that, if PCA churches that are surrounded by South Asian neighbors can begin to take initiative of equipping themselves to reach them, and number of resources, books are available, even trainings are available. I'd like to flash this book,
Ah.
Chapatis for Tea, coming out of the UK by Ram Gidoomal and Margaret Wardell. Very simple, but very practical in understanding South Asian culture and doing ministry among them. So the resources are out there. It'll be great if PCA churches begin to take initiative in equipping and reaching.
That's great. And that book, the multi-Asian church book that was mentioned, and a number of other resources will be sent out to all of you listening, along with the a recording of this, that, pass it on, share it with others, get some conversations going. Really appreciate, the time and that we've been able to have together talking about this. As like I said, I hope this is just a beginning, and we'll be seeing more of this. We will be our next M&A conversation will be will be November the 2nd, just about a month from now. And similar kind of context, we're going to talk about multi-ethnic pastor teams. We're going to plant church. What about having if we want a multi-ethnic church, it's great, especially when you have a minority leader leading the church. I think it's a little easier than when it's majority culture. It can happen. It's great. But what about having a multi-ethnic team and planting a church? And how might that be a great challenge and opportunity in reaching our communities for Christ? Again, thank you. Appreciate your time, gentlemen. And also I'll be sending out the information to everyone with their email addresses, so you can begin to talk about what might it look like forming an Asian American ministries opportunity in the PCA that can be, again, seeing the kingdom expand, not just for, certainly not for our glory, but for the glory of Christ. Again, thank you much. Lord bless and take care.